Hello, students. Welcome to today's session of Massive Open Online course on International Economics. In today's module, we are going to talk about absolute cost advantage theory and, surprisingly, its failure. So, from the title of today's module, it is surprising and attractive because it is the oldest theory of international trade, and at the same time, it is confirmed from the very beginning that it's a failure. So, in spite of that, we have to know what is absolute cost advantage theory because it is the oldest one, and that showed the way how one should approach the theories of international trade. This theory talks about what is the basic reason behind international trade. And this theory was developed by a very famous economist whose name is Adam Smith. So I will go relatively slowly in this module because introducing international trade theory to students who have already gone through microeconomics, macroeconomics, development economics, a bit of other courses is not a very easy thing. And it is not a very easy thing to grasp the concepts of international trade theory, mainly because of two or three things. One is that you need to understand a bunch of issues and you need to understand all those issues in your brain. You will not have the option to see these things in your slides or in your book. So you have to be a little more imaginative and you need to use a lot of concepts of microeconomics. And number three, you have to use the concept of microeconomics thinking beyond the scope of microeconomics. That is why, while introducing international trade theory from a theoretical perspective, when everything is a kind of thought process, we have to start a little slowly. So, let us first give you the brief outline of today's module. So, what we are going to do today? We will introduce the concept of international trade again because you are already exposed to the concept of international trade. Since international trade theory is a little tougher concept, so I will keep on harping these issues. These issues means what is international trade and why international trade and what is the difference between national trade and international trade. And then we will move to the role of difference, particularly the role of cost difference and why the role of cost difference is very important now. And then how the role of difference and cost difference is associated with the idea of absolute cost advantage theory because as the name suggests, the advantage is there and that depends on the cost. Cost of what? The cost of production of goods. And then what is absolute? And if there is absolute, is there anything else which is not absolute? We will come to those issues one by one. And then of course, as I said in the beginning, that I will talk about why this theory is a failure. And in spite of this, this is relevant. So, just I will be explaining one by one and I request you to understand each and every concept of all these things. Because if you fail to understand absolute cost advantage theory, all the forthcoming theories would be almost like the most difficult theories to go through. So Adam Smith's theory of cost of absolute advantage in international trade was developed during 18th century and then it has evolved over time. Adam Smith's famous book, perhaps some of you know, it is an inquiry into the nature and causes of wealth of nations. If you look at the title, it talks about why one country is more rich compared to others. Now look, when we talk of poverty, we think of poorness. But the economics started with not only the concept of poorness or poverty, economics started with the concept of richness. So why one country is rich? What was the nature and the pattern of this wealth of one nation. So that was described by Adam Smith in his book. So if countries are specializing in producing and exporting the commodities that they can manufacture in a cheaper and efficient way than others, then what should they do? Should they produce all the goods, or should they shun production of some goods and concentrate on the production of some other goods? So that was the main driving question behind this theory of absolute cost advantage. I'll come to that absolute cost advantage concept. But before that, what is trade? What is international trade? As you know, trade is nothing but exchange of goods. It could be exchange of ideas, it could be exchange of services. If this exchange takes place domestically, we call it domestic trade. If it is between two individuals, it is called individual trade. If it is between two countries, two nations, it is called international trade. Now, the exchange can be imports or exports. What I sell for a nation's perspective, it is export, and from a state's perspective, it is also export, but one is international, the other is domestic. When you sell, it export. When you buy, it is import. So selling and buying can be replaced easily in the perspective of international trade by two words, one export, the other is import. Now, what is the reason behind this export and import? So the very first reason for which countries engage in international trade is that they are different from each other. So if I am not different from others, then I should not mix with them. You ask yourself, you are not interested to mix with the person or group of people who are like you, maybe like-minded, but they are definitely different. So just like that, here countries are engaged in trade with those countries which are different. Now the question naturally comes, why difference? Why these things are different from others? Why one country is selling a commodity at a higher price? Why another country is selling a commodity at a lower price? If that happens, then whether we should go for trade or not, that will be discussed later on. But what is the reason behind that difference? And in trade means the price. Price of what? Price of goods that I want to sell or that I want to buy. And the market that we consider here is a competitive market. In competitive market, the price should be equal to the average cost of production or the average cost min. What we know, it is the minimum of average cost, and that should ideally be equal to your marginal cost. The popular equality that we all know is P is equal to MC is equal to AC. Now, the price of a commodity should be equal to the per unit cost of production is the phenomenon of a perfectly competitive market. So if we move from perfectly competitive market to an imperfectly competitive market, this equality will not hold true. Keep it in mind. So there I may need to bring in another issues. So whenever needed, I'll talk about that one. But eventually, the price should be a reflection of something. So whenever the module comes that talks about imperfectly competitive market, we will talk about that thing. So here we may consider two countries, we may consider two goods, and we will have certain assumptions that I will talk about those assumptions a little later. But before that, let us give you a very simple example. So I just showed you what are the assumptions, but I have not explained. Now, let us consider an example. Two countries, two goods. Two goods are cloth and wheat. One country is India, other country is USA. There is one factor of production. The factor of production is labor. So that is why absolute cost advantage theory, in a sense, based on labor theory of value. So how much labor is required to produce 1 unit of a good, that is the value of the good. Now, if you look at the table, so this table gives you what? This table gives us unit labor requirement to produce two goods. So this column is for India, this column is for USA. Now, 4 stands for what? Let us see what is written here on the left side. Unit labor requirement of cloth. This means 4 units of labor is required to produce 1 unit of cloth in country India. So 4 laborers can produce 1 cloth in India, whereas 6 laborers required to produce 1 cloth, the same cloth. So goods are homogeneous, same cloth in USA. And in case of wheat, India requires 8 laborers to produce 1 unit of wheat. So I need to compare what is happening, but before that, USA requires 3 units of labor to produce 1 unit of wheat. So if this table is given to you and I ask you, can you just tell me which country is good in producing wheat and which country is good in producing cloth? Just you compare. India requires 4 units of labor, US requires 6 units of labor. So requirement of labor in India is less than the requirement of labor in USA to produce same amount of output cloth. So comparing 4 and 6, since India requires less labor, means India's labor is more productive. So here labor requirement is also a reflection of productivity. Less requirement means more productive. So from here what we can say is that India is relatively efficient in producing cloth compared to USA. However, if we look at wheat, India requires 8 labor, whereas USA requires 3 labors. So it seems that USA is efficient in producing wheat compared to India. So what we are doing, we are comparing absolute requirement. So we are comparing absolute cost. Cost is in terms of labor. If the labor price is 1 all across the globe, so 1 labor gets 1 rupee, then the labor cost for cloth in India is 4, it is 6 in USA. It could be rupees, it could be dollar. And for wheat, it is 8 in India and it is 3 in USA. So it is quite natural that India has advantage in absolute sense over USA in producing cloth, and USA has advantage over India in producing wheat. So that's the basic idea of absolute cost advantage theory. And now, very quickly, as I already said, these are certain assumptions on which the absolute cost advantage theory is based. There are 2 countries, there's one factor of production is there, that is labor, transportation cost is absent, and labor is mobile between 2 sectors, but labor is immobile across countries. These are the very standard assumptions, full employment and the competitive market. You can check any book. And the example that I used here to define absolute cost advantage is again reproduced here, comparing the labor requirement. And the thing that I said is that this is nothing but the productivity case. So on the basis of these 2 things, we need to think of whether this kind of theory that is called absolute cost advantage is beneficial for the countries or not. So now we will talk about how this kind of exchange of goods or production is beneficial for the countries. Let us use the example that I explained a minute ago. So what I said in the very beginning of this course as a whole, not only in today's module, that we need to ensure that this kind of exchange of trade or goods and services should be mutually beneficial for all the trading partners. So if it is not, then there is no point of being engaged in trade. Now we need to check if this kind of exchange following absolute cost advantage theory developed by Adam Smith is mutually beneficial for both the countries. And here the countries are India and USA. So what we see here in our previous example of India and USA, that the unit cost of producing cloth in India is lower than in the USA. And the opposite is true for the wheat production. So for a ready reckoner, let's very quickly check this. What is that? For cloth production, India requires 4. For wheat production, India requires 8. US requires 6 units of labor for cloth production, and US requires 3 units of labor for wheat production. Now, given this setup, so India will benefit if it produces only cloth, because what I said is that India is using less labor to producing cloth compared to USA. So it is better if India produces cloth and exchanges it for USA wheat. Why? Because USA can produce wheat using less labor, means less cost. On the other hand, USA will be advantaged if it specializes in the production of wheat and exchange it for India's cloth. Now, to make the story very simple, let us assume that 1 unit of cloth is exchanged for 1 unit of wheat. So 1 unit cloth production by India should be equivalent to 1 unit wheat production in India. But that's not the interesting part of this kind of theory. The interesting part is that what India has to incur if India produces wheat. India has to incur the cost which is relatively higher compared to USA's wheat. USA produces wheat at a relatively lower cost. So when the exchange is done 1:1, then India can obtain essentially 1 unit of wheat from USA for 4 units of labor. What is that? India is using 4 units of labor to produce 1 unit of cloth. And in exchange of 1 unit of cloth, if India gets 1 unit of wheat from USA, then actually India is exchanging 4 units of labor to get cloth of 1 unit, for which India requires 8 units of labor. So India is actually saving 4 units of labor. So that extra units of labor can be used to produce cloth, for which India is having some advantage in the production. So instead of producing wheat, since India can save 8 units of labor, that 8 units of labor can easily be used to produce 2 more units of cloth. Hence, the production of cloth in India will surely increase. And similarly, the reverse thing for wheat production will happen in USA. USA with 3 units of labor, unit cost of wheat that is prevailed in US market, that obtains 1 unit of cloth. So USA is getting 1 unit of cloth from India, for which India is efficient. So if India is manufacturing cloth at a relatively low cost. So since India is manufacturing cloth at a relatively low cost and exchanging this cloth with America's wheat, means America is also saving some labor. How much labor? Because 1 unit of cloth production in USA requires 6 units of labor. So if the 6 units of labor is saved because USA is getting this cloth from India, then this 6 units of labor can be used to produce more wheat. And remember, 1 unit of wheat production requires only 3 units of labor. So 2 more units of wheat can be produced in America by the saved amount of labor. They are more productive. Yes, of course, this productivity is in absolute sense. So it is better to move from autarky to a trade situation where both these countries are going to specialize in that line of production for which they are most productive. I can use a simple diagram to explain this phenomenon. And of course, after that, I will come to another interesting portion. So here, let us assume that these two countries, India and USA, both are having 480 units of labor. And 480 units of labor can be used to produce wheat and cloth. Now, if 480 units of labor is used to produce cloth in India, how much cloth or how many units of cloth could be produced? That depends on the labor requirement. And India's labor requirement is 4. So, by using 480 units of labor, maximum 120 units of cloth could be produced in India. So, this is here A prime. And on the other hand, this OA gives me how much unit of wheat India could produce. So, this axis measures the quantity of wheat, and 1 unit of wheat requires 8 units of labor. So, at max, India can produce 60 units of cloth. And again, just by looking at the factor requirement for cloth and wheat production in USA, what I can see that at max, US can produce 160 units of wheat and 80 units of cloth. So, from here, it is apparent that OA prime is greater than OB prime and OA is less than OB. OBB prime is the production possibility frontier for USA and AA prime is the production possibility frontier for India. So, if that is true, then it is apparent from the diagram that it is better for India to produce cloth, and India should produce here at A prime, and USA should not produce cloth. Rather, USA should produce only wheat so that USA's production possibility frontier would arrive at an equilibrium at this point. So, total production of wheat and cloth for the entire world as a whole must increase. So, whether there is an overall increase or the output is going up for both these countries together, for that purpose, use your thought process and you divide your entire endowment of labor into 2 parts. Say 240 units of labor is allocated for wheat production and 240 units of labor is allocated for cloth production. Now you use your thought process and then you try to understand what is going to happen. Now, as I know, thus India's requirement is 4 and 8. So, 24 units of labor is required to produce cloth. And again, for wheat production, 240 by 80. So, now you calculate how much cloth is being produced in India in autarky when this is equally divided. 240 by 4 is 60 and now it is 240 by 8, it is 30 units. So, India is producing 60 units of cloth and 30 units of wheat. Similarly, America will produce accordingly. And then if you move from that point and then you devote entire 400 units of labor into the production of cloth in India, then what you will see, India is producing 120 units of cloth. Previously, India was producing 60 units of cloth. Now, very quickly go to USA. By 240 units of labor, and for USA's, the cloth production requires 6 units of labor. 240 by 6 means 40. So, 40 units of cloth is produced in USA in pre-trade situation. 60 units of cloth was produced in India in pre-trade situation. Total cloth production was 60 plus 40, 100. Now, when India is focusing only on the production of cloth, it is 120. So, 120 is definitely greater than 100. So, if India produces only cloth, after supplying its own requirement, even after supplying for America, 20 more units of cloth is there to cater the market. So, more output is being produced. What else do we need? So, that is nothing but a gain for the entire world as a whole. So, from there, you can understand that it is definitely beneficial for both the countries. Now, the question is this theory truly correct? The answer is unfortunately no. Why? There are bunch of reasons. These are written here. The point is that there is only one factor of labor, factor of production, which is labor. It is constant cost throughout and the assumption of perfectly competitive market. and it is irrational to consider that international trade is free and without transportation cost. But these are very technical issues. Apart from that, we have an interesting dimension. This dimension is written here. Look at the table. I just slightly modified the table, and look what happens. India requires 10 labor to produce cloth and 12 labor to produce car or wheat, whatever you assume. It doesn't matter. And USA requires 9 labors to produce cloth and 8 labor to produce car or wheat. So what I see from this table, USA is efficient compared to India in cloth production, and US is efficient compared to India in car production or wheat production. So what should be done? USA should produce everything and India should produce nothing? If that happens, trade should not be there. Then following absolute cost advantage theory developed by Adam Smith, there should not be any trade. But that's not the case. Then if absolute cost advantage theory fails to explain the pattern of trade, then what else? Then there is another theory that we will explain in our next module. But before that, what are the conclusion and takeaways for this lecture? The keeping aside all the weakness and criticism, Adam Smith doubtlessly gave us a quite coherent explanation of absolute cost advantage theory as the fundamental step to enter into the world of international trade. As I said at the very beginning, this is a stepping stone, this is a building block. A more detailed and satisfactory interpretation can be found because since ACA theory fails, there is another theory that is based on the comparative cost advantage analysis that is developed by David Ricardo. And in his statement, he tried to shed light on the situation where trade is taking place without the presence of absolute cost advantage. Students, we will definitely discuss Ricardian theory of cost advantage, but that is surely not absolute cost advantage in our next lecture.